My name is Cameron Dalton, but most people just call me Cam. I'm 37, a former Army Ranger, and now the owner of a successful tactical training center in Austin. I built my life with discipline, precision, and loyalty, values I carried over from my time in the military. I believed in structure, I believed in trust, and for 10 years I believed in my marriage. I thought I had a wife who stood by me, a woman who loved me as much as I loved her. But I was wrong. It started with the little things. Late nights at work, a phone that was always face down, the sudden effort she put into her appearance on days she had meetings. I ignored it. I told myself I was being paranoid, that Avery would never betray me. And then I found out the truth. She wasn't just cheating. She was stealing from me, lying to my face while funneling my money to someone else. And not just anyone, my own brother. That was the moment everything changed. Because I wasn't the kind of man to break down and cry. I was the kind of man who made a plan. And I was going to destroy them both. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss new stories. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, it really helps. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Let's discuss. I never thought I'd be the guy telling this kind of story. You hear about betrayal, you see it in movies, read about it online, shake your head and think, that could never be me. You imagine that if it ever did happen, you'd catch it right away. You'd see the signs, trust your instincts, put a stop to it before it got too far. But the truth is, when betrayal comes from the people closest to you, the ones you trust the most, it doesn't announce itself with sirens. It seeps in, quiet, insidious, like water through cracked stone, and by the time you notice, the damage is already done. My name is Cameron Dalton, but most people call me Cam. I'm 37, a former Army Ranger, and now the owner of a tactical training center in Austin, Texas. It's my pride and joy, something I built with my own hands after leaving the military. It's more than just a business, it's a way to stay sharp, to give civilians the tools they need to protect themselves. I teach self-defense, firearms training, situational awareness, everything a person needs to stand their ground in a dangerous world. My life has always been about control, discipline, and preparation, but nothing could have prepared me for what was coming. I married Avery 10 years ago. She was everything I wasn't. Wild, spontaneous, full of fire, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and make everyone turn their heads, not just because she was beautiful, but because she carried herself like she belonged in the spotlight. And I loved that about her. She made life feel less rigid, less predictable. I was the planner, the strategist, the one who thought 5 steps ahead. She was the one who reminded me that sometimes you just have to live in the moment. It worked for us, or at least I thought it did. We had a good life, a nice house, steady income, friends who envied how solid we seemed. Avery worked in event planning, which suited her perfectly. She thrived in fast-paced environments, loved the networking, the socializing, the chaos of it all. I figured that was why she had been coming home later than usual, why she was suddenly so invested in her career after years of just coasting. It made sense, until it didn't. The first signs were easy to ignore. A missed dinner here, a late-night text there. I noticed how she started putting more effort into her appearance on random weekdays, how she'd spend extra time on her hair and makeup just to meet clients. How she laughed at her phone more often, but when I asked what was funny, she'd brush it off like it was nothing. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to be the husband who trusted his wife, so I didn't press. Not at first. Then there was Danny, my younger brother, the golden boy, the screw-up. He was always the charismatic one, the guy who could talk his way out of anything, who coasted through life on charm alone. While I was serving overseas, he was playing gigs at bars, chasing his dream of being a musician. Our mother doted on him, always excused his mistakes. "Danny's just figuring things out," she'd say, even when figuring things out meant blowing rent money on a new guitar or getting bailed out of trouble, and for as long as I could remember, I was the one cleaning up his messes. So when he suddenly had money, new clothes, better gear, a nicer car, I was suspicious, but when I asked him about it, he just laughed. "I got lucky," he said, flashing that easy grin of his. "Got some investors backing me." That should have set off alarms, but I told myself he was finally catching a break. That maybe, for once, things were going his way. I should have known better. Looking back, the signs were all there. The way Avery and Danny interacted when they thought I wasn't paying attention, the inside jokes, the shared glances, the subtle way her hand would linger on his arm a little too long. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid, because what kind of woman betrays her husband with his own brother? I found out the truth on a Tuesday night, not because I went looking for it, but because fate has a cruel sense of humor. Avery was in the kitchen, barefoot, a glass of wine in her hand, phone pressed to her ear. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, just passing by when I heard my name. "I don't know how I ended up here," she was saying, her voice soft, almost wistful. "Cam is solid, he's a good guy, but I feel trapped. It's not exciting. Danny makes me feel alive." I froze mid-step, my stomach twisted, my pulse hammered in my ears. "You should have seen the look on his face the other night," she laughed. "He has no idea." I stood there, gripping the doorframe, feeling something inside me splinter. This wasn't guilt. This wasn't hesitation. She wasn't confessing in shame. She was reveling in it. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just stared at the floor, my body cold, my mind blank. I wanted to walk in there, rip the phone out of her hand, demand answers. But I didn't. 'Cause something deeper, something darker was waking up inside me. I turned and walked away. I sat in my office, in the dark, staring at nothing. My hands trembled, but not from grief, not from heartbreak, from something sharper, more controlled. I'd spent my life planning, strategizing, thinking 3 steps ahead of my enemies, and if Avery and Danny thought they had played me, if they thought I was just going to sit back and accept this, they were wrong. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to wait. I was going to watch. And when the time was right, I was going to destroy them both. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my office staring at the wall, replaying Avery's words in my head until they lost all meaning. Trapped. Not exciting. Danny makes me feel alive. It was almost laughable. I had been through war, had faced death more times than I could count, had survived in places that would break most men. And yet, here I was, sitting in the dark like some clueless husband in a bad soap opera, blindsided by the people who were supposed to be my family. But the difference between me and those men was that I wasn't weak. I wasn't going to fall apart. I wasn't going to let emotions cloud my judgment. I was going to do what I did best: gather intel, build a strategy, and execute a plan with precision. By morning, my anger had settled into something colder, more calculated. I kissed Avery on the cheek when she came down for coffee, pretending nothing was wrong. She smiled at me like she always did, and for the first time I saw it for what it was: a performance. Everything about her, from the way she touched me to the way she laughed at my jokes, was an act. I had never questioned it before, but now I wondered how long she had been faking. I started with her phone, not by snooping. I wasn't some desperate fool who needed to scroll through messages like a jealous teenager. No, I did it the smart way. A small piece of spyware, something I had used in the military to track enemy movements, installed onto her device while she was in the shower. It gave me full access: texts, calls, locations, even the microphone. I didn't have to guess anymore. I would know everything. Then I focused on Danny. He was predictable. Always had been. He thrived on attention, on validation, on feeling like the world owed him something. If he thought he had pulled one over on me, he would get cocky. He would start taking risks, and I would be watching. For the next few days, I played the role of the oblivious husband. I smiled, I laughed, I acted like life was normal, but beneath it, I was collecting every piece of information I could, and what I found made my stomach turn. Avery wasn't just cheating on me. She was investing in Danny. My money, my resources being funneled into his pathetic excuse of a music career. She had opened a separate bank account in his name and was transferring funds in small amounts, just enough to stay under my radar. But now, nothing was under my radar. I followed the money, tracing every transaction: studio sessions, hotel stays, expensive dinners, all on my dime, all while she came home to me and pretended to be the loving wife. I listened to their phone calls, their whispered conversations, their plans to eventually tell me the truth once Danny was established. because that was the real endgame. I wasn't just being replaced, I was being used, strung along until I was no longer necessary, until Avery was sure Danny could take care of her the way I had. The stupidity of it all almost made me laugh. Danny take care of her? He couldn't even take care of himself. She thought she was trading stability for excitement, but all she was doing was jumping onto a sinking ship, and she had no idea that I had already cut the ropes. I started making moves of my own. First, the business. Avery had access to our accounts, but she didn't know that I had an entirely separate financial structure for the company. I transferred ownership to a new entity in my name only, making sure that if she ever tried to take something from me in the divorce she thought she was planning, she would get nothing. Then I froze our joint accounts, citing suspicious activity to the bank, just enough to make her panic, to make her think something was wrong, but not enough for her to suspect me. Then I waited. I needed her to feel safe. I needed her to think that everything was still going according to her plan, because when the moment came, when I finally moved in for the kill, I wanted her to know, without a doubt, that she had never been in control of anything. Avery didn't notice the changes right away. She still kissed me before leaving the house, still smiled at me over dinner, still laughed at my jokes as if we were just another happy couple going through the motions of a normal life. I studied her, watching for any sign that she suspected something was wrong, but she carried on as if everything was fine. That was the thing about people like Avery and Danny. They only saw what they wanted to see. They were so wrapped up in their own selfish little world, convinced they were smarter than everyone else, that they never considered the possibility that I might be onto them, that I might be playing my own game. The first crack appeared one morning over breakfast. She was drinking her coffee, scrolling through her phone, when I saw her expression shift. It was quick, just a flicker of confusion, maybe frustration, but it was there. Her fingers tapped anxiously at the screen, her brows drawing together. "That's weird," she muttered under her breath. I took a slow sip of my own coffee, pretending not to notice. "Something wrong?" I asked casually. She hesitated just a second too long before forcing a smile. "Just a bank glitch, I think." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral, but inside, I felt something cold and satisfied settle in my chest. She was starting to feel it. The money she had been siphoning into Danny's account had slowed down to a trickle. Not enough to completely raise alarms, not yet. Just enough to make her second guess herself. Maybe it was the bank's fault. Maybe she had just miscalculated. Maybe. She would tell herself anything except the truth. That I was the one pulling the strings now. Danny, on the other hand, was less subtle. He had never been good at hiding his emotions, especially when things weren't going his way. He was used to having people bail him out, to money appearing when he needed it. But now that steady stream was drying up, and he had no idea why. I watched from a distance as he started making more calls, scrambling to book extra gigs, trying to figure out how to maintain the lifestyle Avery had been funding. Without her help, without my money, he was sinking, fast. But I wasn't about to let them figure it out just yet. I needed them to think it was just bad luck, just a rough patch, just something temporary that would fix itself soon, so I let a few small transfers go through, just enough to keep them from fully panicking, just enough to keep them complacent. Because when I took everything away, I wanted it to hit them all at once. I wanted them to realize in a single, devastating moment that their safety net was gone. The real test came a week later. Avery approached me in the evening, her frustration barely hidden behind a sweet smile. "Hey babe," she said, leaning against the doorway of my office. "Do you mind if we move some money around? I need to cover something for work." Her voice was light, casual, but I could hear the tension underneath. She was testing me, trying to see if I had noticed anything. I set my pen down, turning my chair slightly to face her. "How much do you need?" "Just a couple thousand," she said, too quickly. "Nothing major." I let a thoughtful expression cross my face, pretending to consider it. "Sure. I'll take care of it tomorrow." She hesitated. Just a second. Just long enough for me to see the flicker of doubt cross her face before she smiled again. "Thanks, Cam. You're the best." She had no idea that by tomorrow, she wouldn't have access to those accounts at all. That night, I lay in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling while she slept peacefully, oblivious to what was coming. I had spent weeks watching, planning, waiting. I had let them think they were winning, let them feel safe. But that illusion was about to shatter. Tomorrow I would make my move, and when I did, I wanted them to understand, without a shadow of a doubt, that they had never been in control, not for a single second. I woke up early, long before Avery's alarm went off, and got out of bed without making a sound. I didn't need to check my phone to know that everything was already in motion. Last night, after she had fallen asleep, I finalized the last steps of my plan. The accounts were locked. Every penny she had funneled to Danny was gone. The studio sessions, the expensive hotel stays, the dinners, every luxury they had stolen from me had just been ripped away. But that was only the beginning. Money was just one part of it. Today I was going to take something much bigger from them. I went through my morning routine like nothing had changed. I showered, got dressed, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, waiting. It took Avery a few extra minutes to come downstairs, her phone clutched in her hand. She was frowning, scrolling, her fingers moving faster than usual. "Cam, did you mess with the bank accounts?" she asked, her voice forced into casualness, but I could hear the edge of panic underneath. I sipped my coffee, setting the mug down before answering. "Why would I?" She let out a short, nervous laugh. "I don't know, there's just something weird going on. My card got declined when I tried to order something this morning." She kept tapping at her phone screen, her frustration growing by the second. "And I can't seem to transfer money out. The bank must have flagged something." I tilted my head, pretending to think. "Maybe you should call them." She nodded, chewing her lip, and walked into the other room to make the call. I listened as she spoke, her tone shifting from polite confusion to barely controlled frustration. Then silence. I knew the moment they told her the truth because she didn't respond right away. A long pause stretched out, then a weak, "I don't understand." Another pause, then, quieter this time, "No, that can't be right." She came back into the kitchen slower than before, her face pale. "They're saying I was removed from the accounts, that I don't have access anymore." She looked at me, searching for some kind of explanation, some kind of reassurance. "Cam, what's going on?" I let a beat of silence stretch between us, then smiled. "I guess that means you're officially broke." She blinked. "What?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "I know, Avery." She froze, her breath catching. "Know what?" "Don't do that," I said, shaking my head. "Don't insult me with fake innocence. I know about you and Danny. I know where my money went. I know everything." Her face drained of color, her fingers tightening around her phone like it was the only thing keeping her standing. "Cam, No," I cut her off. "You don't get to explain. You don't get to cry and beg and tell me it was a mistake. You didn't make a mistake, Avery. You made a choice. And now, you're going to live with the consequences." She looked like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Her mouth opened, then closed, her breathing uneven. I stood up, grabbing my keys. "You should probably go see Danny," I said. "He's having an even worse morning than you." I left her standing there motionless and walked out the door. Donnie's apartment was about 20 minutes away, but I wasn't in a rush. I wanted him to have time to realize just how deep in the hole he was. By the time I parked outside his place, I already knew what I would find. His car was there, the same one Avery had helped him pay for, but soon enough, it wouldn't matter. Without money, without her help, he'd be drowning in bills. I took my time walking up to his door, enjoying the quiet morning air. When I knocked, there was a pause, then hurried footsteps. The door swung open, and there he was, looking like he hadn't slept. His hair was a mess, his shirt wrinkled, his face tight with frustration. "Cam," he said, his voice uncertain, "what are you doing here?" I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Just checking in. You look like you're having a rough day." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "Yeah, man, it's this bank shit. My accounts are frozen, and I don't know why. I tried calling, but they won't tell me anything." I nodded. "That sucks." He frowned, something about my tone finally setting off alarm bells in his head. "Wait, do you know what's going on?" I let the silence stretch, watching as realization started creeping in. The first flicker of fear in his eyes, the first crack in his usual cocky facade. I wanted him to feel it. I wanted him to understand exactly how badly he had screwed up. "You really thought you were going to get away with it?" I finally said. "You and Avery, stealing from me, lying to my face?" His jaw tensed, his whole body going stiff. "Cam, listen, it's not what you think." I laughed, shaking my head. "Don't bother. I've seen the bank statements, the texts, the hotel bookings. I know exactly what it is." I took a step closer, and for the first time in his life, Danny looked genuinely afraid of me. "You stole from me. You used me. And now, you have nothing." He swallowed hard, his hands clenching into fists. "Cam, man, please. We can talk about this." "No," I said simply, "we can't." He opened his mouth again, but I wasn't interested in hearing whatever pathetic excuse he had prepared. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing in his doorway, his world crumbling around him. But this wasn't over yet. Not even close. I had taken their money. Now I was going to take their dignity. Danny stood there, frozen, gripping the microphone like it was the only thing tethering him to reality. The confidence, the arrogance, the smug little smirk he always wore. It was all gone now. His eyes darted across the crowd, his breathing uneven, his fingers twitching at his sides as if he could somehow stop the inevitable. He looked lost, like a man realizing too late that he had stepped onto a battlefield completely unarmed. The audio continued playing through the speakers, crisp and clear, cutting through the heavy silence of the room. Danny makes me feel alive. Cam is just safe? Boring? I was never in love with him, not really. A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. I saw a couple of women exchange looks, their mouths slightly open in disbelief. A guy near the bar let out a low whistle. Someone else laughed under their breath, that sharp, mocking kind of laughter that made people shift uncomfortably. Avery stood near the front, her drink clutched in her hand, her face frozen in horror. She wasn't looking at Danny. She wasn't looking at the speakers. She was looking at me. She knew. She had always been quick, I'd give her that. The moment her voice echoed through the venue, the moment her own words exposed every lie she had fed me, she had put the pieces together. I let her look. Let her see the truth settle in. Let her realize, too late, that she had been playing a game she was never going to win. Danny finally moved, jerking forward, grabbing the mic with a fumbling grip, his voice cracking as he tried to salvage something. There's some kind of mix-up. The audio cut off. For a split second, silence hung in the air, but it wasn't the kind of silence that lets you breathe. It was the kind that presses down on you, that makes you feel trapped, the kind of silence that comes right before everything collapses. Then the first wave of laughter started. It wasn't loud at first, just a few chuckles, a couple of people whispering to each other, but it spread fast. A slow clap started near the bar, sarcastic, drawn out. Someone in the back let out a long, exaggerated ooh, like they were watching a fight about to break out. A group of guys near the stage elbowed each other, smirking. Danny swallowed hard. His knuckles turned white around the microphone stand. This is some kind of joke," he stammered, his voice barely carrying over the noise. The club owner, a guy I had spoken to earlier, stepped onto the stage. He was grinning, shaking his head as he grabbed the mic right out of Danny's hands. "Yeah, I think we're done here," he said, his voice amused but firm. "Let's clear the stage for someone with actual talent." The crowd erupted. Danny took a step back like he had been slapped. The laughter was growing now, rolling through the venue in waves, unstoppable. Avery was shrinking into herself, her shoulders tight, her face burning red. She wasn't used to this. She had spent her whole life being admired, being wanted, being adored, and now she was the punchline of a joke she didn't even know she was a part of. I stayed where I was, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, watching it all unfold. Danny turned, his head whipping back and forth, searching for a way out. His face was tight with frustration, with embarrassment, with something dangerously close to fear. He had always been the guy who could talk his way out of anything, who could charm his way back into anyone's good graces, but not this time. Avery grabbed his arm, yanking him toward the exit, her movements stiff and desperate. She wanted out. She needed out. She couldn't stand in that room for another second, surrounded by the wreckage of the life she thought she had built. She looked at me one last time before she turned. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was pure, undeniable defeat. And that was when she truly understood. She hadn't just lost me. She had lost everything. Avery and Danny disappeared after that night. They had no choice. Their humiliation was public, their reputations shattered, and there was no recovering from it. Everywhere they turned, they found closed doors, burned bridges, and whispers that followed them like shadows. They weren't just exposed, they were ruined. Avery lost her job within a week. It wasn't just the fallout from the club, though that alone was enough to turn her into a joke among her co-workers. It was everything else I had set in motion. I had sent carefully selected pieces of information to the right people, including her boss. The missing company funds, the questionable expenses, the money that had quietly slipped through the cracks under her watch. She had been using company resources just like she had used mine. It didn't take much for them to decide she was a liability. One closed-door meeting later, she was escorted out of the building, her career in ruins. Danny wasn't any better off. Without Avery's money propping him up, he crumbled fast. He owed people. He had spent every dime he had living like a rock star before he had earned the right. And now? No one wanted to book him. No club owner wanted the baggage of the guy whose biggest claim to fame was getting exposed as a cheating, lying con artist. Musicians he once called friends didn't return his calls. He wasn't just broke, he was alone. I didn't know where they went after that. Didn't care. They weren't my problem anymore. The divorce papers were delivered a week later. Avery didn't contest anything. She couldn't. The prenup was airtight, and with her financial records exposed, she had no leverage. No lawyer was going to take her case, not when she had nothing to offer. She signed the papers without a fight, without a word. I kept the house, the business, the accounts. She walked away with nothing. Some men might have wanted a final conversation. Some might have needed to hear her admit she was wrong, to beg for forgiveness, to break down and cry. But I didn't need any of that. I had already seen the truth written all over her face that night at the club. I had already heard the desperation in Danny's voice when he realized it was over. I didn't need closure. I had already won. The first morning after everything was finalized, I woke up early. Not because I had to, not because I couldn't sleep, but because I wanted to. The house was quiet, still, peaceful in a way it hadn't been in a long time. No more lies, no more betrayals, no more wondering what was happening behind my back. Just silence. Just freedom. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, taking my time, letting the simple routine settle over me. The air smelled different, cleaner somehow, as if everything that had tainted my life had finally been wiped away. I took my mug out onto the back porch, settling into my chair as the first hints of sunlight stretched across the horizon. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the weight of anger pressing against my ribs. I didn't feel the gnawing ache of betrayal. I didn't feel anything but calm. Somewhere out there, Avery and Danny were struggling, facing the consequences of their own choices. Maybe they were together, clinging to each other out of desperation. Maybe they had already turned on each other, tearing each other apart now that the illusion was gone. It didn't matter, because I wasn't thinking about them anymore. I was thinking about the future, about what came next. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was looking forward to it.